Let's start the first lecture by Mariam. Please take it away.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear? Do I need microphone here? No.
So we will not hear you here, but this is only for Zoom.
Okay, but I mean, they can hear me.
Can you hear?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will try to speak loud.
Yeah, we would prefer to keep the fan on for the lecture, if that's okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So thanks a lot, Marcus and Mauricio, for inviting me to this very nice school and to this very nice historic place. Thanks to you for attending the lectures. It's a pleasure being here, and especially because in this same room, I attended one of my first conferences as a PhD many years ago. And then somebody told me yesterday that she was 2 by then. Then one realized how times goes by. Okay, so then in these lectures, I'm going to talk about neutrino theory and phenomenology. And this is essentially the outline, if it goes, yes, the outline of my classes. Okay, I will start with some historical introduction on neutrinos and the properties of neutrinos in the Standard Model. Then I will discuss the phenomenon of neutrino oscillations in vacuum and also in matter. We will see how matter affects the neutrino oscillations. I will discuss the main results of trineutrino phenomenology. And in the final part of the lecture, I will discuss a little bit on the searches for neutrino physics beyond the Standard Model. Okay? So let's start with this first topic. So you already got some lectures yesterday, but just to remember a little bit what is a neutrino, it's a fermion spin 1/2 particle that is neutral, is almost massless. We will see that in the Standard Model is completely massless, and it comes in 3 different flavors. And then what else we know about neutrinos? So that they are very abundant, essentially. They are the second particle most abundant after photons in the universe. And then they are produced in very large quantities, either from the sun, from the natural radioactivity of the Earth, in nuclear power plants. Even our body produces lots of neutrinos. Okay, so here you have a summary of the different places where neutrinos can be produced, different neutrino sources, where we differentiate between artificial sources as nuclear reactors and particle accelerators, and then natural sources as in the Earth atmosphere by the interaction of cosmic rays, in the Earth interior, in the sun, supernova, and astrophysical sources, and also in the early universe. So you can see there is a tick in all places where we have already detected neutrinos. In the case of the early universe, that I guess you will learn with more detail in Vivian's lectures, then we have only indirect evidence of those neutrinos. Okay, we have not measured directly because the energy is very small. And regarding the spectrum, so you can see here the energy of neutrinos expand over many orders of magnitude, from the very low energy neutrinos, the cosmological ones, the ones we have not detected, until the astrophysical ones with the largest energies, so spanning from the below the electron volt up to the peta electron volt. Okay, and why are they so important? So neutrinos are very important because they can prove environments that other particles cannot do. Okay, like for instance, the supernova explosions that you will learn in these many talks this week, the core of the sun. Also, the role is crucial for the evolution of the universe, so they play an essential role in the Big Bang, nucleosynthesis, in the structural formation. They could also help explaining the matter asymmetry of the universe, okay, through the leptogenesis mechanism. And they could be even a tiny, but they could be a component of the dark matter of the universe. And most important, at least from my point of view, is that they have provided the first evidence for physics beyond the Standard Model. There is no other strong evidence as such as that one. So the thing that neutrinos have a mass is an evidence that we need to extend the Standard Model of particle physics. Okay. So let's go after this very brief introduction. Let's see how historically neutrinos were studied. So I don't know, maybe this is very obvious to you, but I like to start this lecture with these introductions. You know that the neutrino was proposed after the study of the beta radioactive experiments in the 20s, in the 1910 and 1920. There were some experiments studying this beta decay of different nuclei, and it was not possible to understand the spectrum of the electrons produced in such decays. Okay. Because the thing is that if there was only one particle produced in the decay, then it was expected that this electron will have a definite energy. But what was observed was that the electrons have a different spectrum of energy. So they could take this maximum energy, but also lower energies. And then in order to explain that, even Niels Bohr suggested that perhaps this could be understood if the energy was not conserved in the individual nuclear processes. So perhaps energy conservation was a principle for the whole statistical system, but not in individual processes. And then this is why one could understand this thing. I'm afraid this time he was wrong. And sorry. And the answer arrives with the proposal by Pauli that introduced a new particle. Okay. He proposed that if in addition of the electron, there was another particle being produced in the same process, then this other particle could share the energy with the electron, and then explaining why this electron was not taking this exact value of the energy. And then maybe you have heard already about this very famous letter written by Pauli. He sent it to Lise Meitner, that was going to attend a conference that he had to miss because he has a very important event in Zurich, and then he sent this letter to the radioactive ladies and gentlemen proposing the existence of this new particle that should be an electrically neutral particle, and it should be a spin 1/2 particle in order to conserve the angular momentum. Okay. Also, this new particle had to interact very weakly with matter because otherwise this particle would have been measured, and it was not measured. And so this was his proposal. And indeed, he realizes that he was proposing a very difficult thing, a particle that was very difficult to detect. And then this is what he said, that he had done a very, very bad thing, proposing a particle that cannot be detected. It's something that no theorists should do. This is what he said in 1930. Okay, sorry. But then, just some years after that, Fermi postulated the first theory of nuclear beta decay, the theory of weak interactions, that in analogy with the QED Lagrangian. So with this theory, he could explain this beta decay, the neutron decay to proton, electron, and antineutrino, and then he used this particle proposed by Pauli in order to explain his theory. Okay, sorry. Then since the particle, already a neutral, first this particle introduced by Pauli was called neutron because it was a neutral particle, but then since in 1932, Chadwick had discovered the neutron with a mass similar to proton. Then they had to rebaptize, to change the name of this new particle. And then they call it neutrino for a small neutron in Italian. Okay. And then this is why we got to this name for the particle. Okay. But then, so if this particle was there, what it has not been detected yet? So using the theory proposed by Fermi, Bethe and Peierls used this theory in order to calculate the cross-section of a process involving neutrinos, trying to see how possible was to detect this particle. Then they calculated this cross-section for this process, the interaction of neutrinos with neutrons and with protons, and then they got this value here. Then if you make some numbers, you can see that it's around 10 to the minus 43 times the energy and the momentum of the particle. So this is very, very small compared to for instance, the standard cross-sections in the electromagnetic cross-sections, like the one for photon and proton, 10 to the minus 25. So it's many, many orders of magnitude below. So this is why it was understood that this particle has not been detected yet. Okay, so in the exercises this afternoon, I will propose you to calculate, using this cross-section, the mean free path of neutrinos, for instance, in water or in lead, trying to understand, to put these numbers on your mind. I mean, this is the cross-section, but then I think it's more graphic to calculate which is the mean free path of neutrinos in lead and water, and we will see then how difficult it is to detect them. Okay, so you remember, we have left Pauli saying that he proposed a particle impossible to detect. But it's really impossible to detect. Okay, it's true that it's very complicated, but in order to do an estimation of how feasible is calculated, is detecting neutrinos, one should do some numbers. So the important thing is not only the cross-section that we have seen is very, very small, but also we need to consider the flux, the number of neutrinos that are produced. And we have seen in the first slides that usually sources are very powerful. They send a lot of neutrinos. So we need to multiply the flux times the cross-section and also the volume of the detector, the target of the material that is interacting with neutrinos. So then doing this product, then we can understand really how difficult it is to detect neutrinos. So considering a 1 ton detector and a flux of 10 to the 10 neutrinos per second, that is the flux one can find in reactor experiments, for instance, one can see that even though this cross-section is very small, one can obtain a few neutrino events per day. So not that bad after all, okay? Because this number is feasible in the nature. You may have, the reactor neutrino flux, it depends on the distance. You may have close to the detector 10 to the 20, and the solar neutrino flux 7, 10 to the 10. So these are not very crazy numbers. So then it's, in principle, building large enough detectors, one can detect few neutrinos, okay? We will see also these numbers in the exercise session, try to understand the size of the experiments we need to build, okay? Okay, then, once it was realized that, okay, it's not impossible to detect neutrinos, the first proposals arrived for the neutrino detection. The first one was a bit crazy. It was proposed by Rines and Cogwan, and their idea was to detect neutrinos after a nuclear explosion. So their idea was, you know, by that time there were many tests of nuclear weapons, so then they were planning just to put the detector in a hole located 40 meters from the explosion, and then just detect the neutrinos, just leave the detector there in this pit, and then detect them over there. The thing is that, I mean, the idea was not bad, I mean, was interesting because essentially this nuclear explosion is a very powerful source of neutrinos, but the problem is that it is a very short event. So it has a lot of neutrinos, but in a very short time, and it's very difficult to control the systematics of the experiment. So at the end, they didn't do this, and then they changed their mind, and they proposed to detect neutrinos close to a reactor, nuclear reactor, okay? First of all, they tried with the Poltergeist project in the Hamburg reactor. However, they didn't manage because they were, in order to detect the neutrinos, one needs to control the background around. And indeed, that detector, it was not easy to control the background. But some years later, in 1956, they made a similar experiment in the Savannah River detector. And then they were successful, and they measured the electron neutrino by the first time. So then their idea was to use a tank with water and cadmium chloride in order to detect the neutrinos. The idea is that the electron neutrinos were produced from the reactor, then they would interact with protons via this process that we know as inverse beta decay, producing a neutron and a positron. The positron would be annihilated with an electron in the tank, producing 2 photons, and the neutron would be absorbed by the cadmium that, after being excited, would emit photons. So then the detection of these 3 photons in coincidence was a clear signal that an electron and neutrino arrived to the detector, okay? And then this is why they detected for the first time the electron neutrino. Thanks to this result, Rines got the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1995. Cogwan couldn't because he was dead by then, and yeah. And then the nice thing is that after their detection, they sent a telegram to Pauli, explaining that they finally had detected the particle he had proposed. Here is a picture of the telegram they sent to Pauli. Okay, so this is what they measured. Then going back again a little bit to Fermi. So as I told you, Fermi proposed the theory for the beta decay, just with this Lagrangian similar to the QED Lagrangian, okay? Then now the idea was, okay, with this Fermi theory, one can explain beta decay. Can we apply this theory to other decays in order to see if we can apply the same structure to other processes? And then they realized that this could be done interpreting these terms of the Lagrangian as some currents. So the nucleon current and the electron current, the leptonic current. And then with this definition, the Lagrangian for the beta decay could be written in this way. Okay, then it was realized that these currents were transforming as vectors under Lorentz transformations, okay? As similar as in QED. Then if this is vectors, this Lagrangian was a product of 2 vectors, and then it was transforming as a scalar under Lorentz transformations. So then Gamow and Teller, some years later, they tried to generalize this proposal of the Fermi theory, just trying to build different terms, different Lorentz scalar terms for the Lagrangian. They realized, okay, the Lagrangian should be Lorentz scalar, so let's see all the different ways we have to build Lorentz scalars with the different fields. And then, assuming the parity was conserved in weak interactions, they propose all these three terms, all these five terms. So scalar, scalar, vector, vector, that is the Fermi one, tensor, tensor, axial, axial, and pseudoscalar, pseudoscalar. In principle, these terms were all allowed to explain these weak interactions, but assuming parity was conserved in weak interactions. But by then there was a situation, the so-called the puzzle theta tau. This puzzle consisted in the situation where two particles that in principle were very similar in mass, in half-life, everything, this called theta and tau, were exhibiting very different decay channels with different parity. So the theta particle was decaying to a final state with parity +1, and the tau was decaying to a final state with parity -1. Okay, all the properties were the same except this one. Then this was very challenging. So people was not understanding what was happening with these particles. Then in 1956, Li and Yang proposed that perhaps it was the same particle, but parity was violated in the weak interactions, and then these two decays were allowed. But it was a theory proposal, but then Chen-Hsin Wu, together with her team, they proposed an experiment to check the proposal by Li and Yang and trying to see if indeed the weak interactions were violating parity. Okay, so this is what she did in this experiment. I mean, they used some atoms of cobalt with the spin aligned with magnetic fields, and then they just were observing the decay. Okay, in principle, they were observing this decay with the cobalt was decaying to nickel, electron, antineutrino, and electron. And they were observing, and in most of the cases, the electrons were emitted with the spin anti-parallel to their momentum. Okay. If parity was conserved in weak interactions, then the transform parity process should be observed with the same probability. This is the one here. This is the same process with parity conserved. Then it should be equally valid to observe electrons emitted with the spin parallel to their momentum. But this is not what they observed. They observed that only fewer cases were observing this with this configuration. Okay? And this is why she together with her team, demonstrated that parity was maximally violated in weak interactions. And then this was because antineutrinos were preferably emitted in the direction of the field, okay, parallel to their spin. And therefore, the electrons were emitted in the antiparallel direction. Okay. Then, after this result, Li and Yang got the Nobel Prize in physics, not Wu, okay, that demonstrated the result, but she got the first Wolf Prize in physics. Okay. Then later on, another team also showed that neutrinos can only be emitted with their spin anti-parallel to the momentum direction. Okay, but the important thing is that here it was showed that weak interactions violate maximally parity. Okay. So another important thing to understand here, since I was mentioning that sometimes in the Wu experiment, antineutrinos were emitted with their spin parallel to their momentum. Okay, so here we need to introduce the concept of helicity and chirality. So because I'm going to use it after, yeah. So helicity is essentially the projection of the spin along the momentum of the particle. So this is a quantity that one can calculate after the spin and the momentum of a particle. This helicity is Lorentz invariance, but only for massless particles. And it is directly measurable. You can measure the helicity of a particle. And this has not to be confused with the chirality. The chirality is not a quantity that you can measure, but it's an asymmetric property of chiral objects, meaning that a chiral object is the one that cannot be superimposed to their own image. For instance, our hands, they are the mirror image, but they cannot be superimposed, okay? So this is a property of the particles. And then chirality is defined with these projectors, left and right, defined here. When we discuss about left-handed particles, right-handed particles, we are talking about chirality. Okay, when we say a left-handed particle, we mean that its chirality is negative. Okay, and in this case, this quantity is Lorentz invariance. although it's not directly measurable. This we cannot measure directly, okay? So for massless particles, helicity coincides with chirality, okay? In that case, we are talking about the same thing. Helicity is chirality. However, for massive particles, the chiral states contain contributions from both helicities, okay? When we discuss, for instance, an electron that is left-handed, it may have contributions for helicity positive and negative. And for ultra-relativistic particles, the left-handed or right-handed chiral projection is dominated by negative for left-handed particles and positive for right-handed particles, okay? So this is, this is sometimes very confusing because there are two concepts that are very similar, but they are not the same. One thing is measurable, the other thing is not measurable, okay? So going back to this theory that you remember, we were with Fermi. Then Gamow and Teller proposed all the different terms one can build with the in order to get a Lorentz scalar, assuming that parity was conserved. But since now it was discovered that parity is violated in weak interactions, then one needs to rethink these all different terms proposed by Gamow and Teller, and then we should add a new term. This new term should be considered as well. Terms of the form vector times axial. So this is vector and axial, okay? This was not considered before. Besides, we have seen that with these experiments for parity violation, we have seen that only neutrinos have only negative helicity. In the processes studied, only neutrinos have been observed with negative helicity, antineutrinos with positive helicity, like in Wu experiment, okay? This means that when we use the neutrino field here, essentially what we need to, the field that participates is the left projection of the neutrino field. Okay, that one here. So then we can rewrite the electronic current. We have seen with Fermi, this was the electronic current, but then we need to take into account that only the left-handed part of the neutrino interacts. So then essentially the electronic current will be modified by that one with the left-handed projector, okay? And then one can realize that this term here, this modified electronic current here, taking into account the left part of the neutrino field, if you operate a little bit, I guess you already have some courses of field theory, you know how to manipulate these left projectors and right projectors. So you can show that this can be written in this same way here. So this means that not only the left-handed part of neutrinos interact through weak interactions, but also only the left-handed part of the electron field participates in weak interaction. That is a very nice result. Okay, so this I'm just developing from this from the Fermi theory, but if we want to apply this kind of technique to all different processes, then one can generalize this current to the B minus A current for different fields using these generic couplings GV and GA. Okay? And in general, when we will deal with particles with mass, that we will have left and right-handed component, then this electronic current should be written, we will give rise to these two terms. One term with the left-handed fields and another term with the right-handed fields. Okay? You can see that this, in that case, the vector and axial vector currents preserve chirality, meaning that the terms, the current terms are built only with left-handed fields or only with right-handed fields. Okay, this is an interesting result, and we will start talking about neutrino masses. We will see that this is not the case when we consider neutrino masses, because neutrino masses, the mass term will mix the left with the right-handed fields. Okay, but as for the currents, they preserve chirality. Okay. Okay, so we have been studying only the electron neutrino, but there is more than one neutrino. In 1959, Bruno Pontecorvo suggested the existence of a second neutrino, because by then it was known already the muon. Okay, there was some studies using muons, and then Pontecorvo thought that perhaps if the electron neutrino was associated to the electron, the muon had another neutrino associated to it. And then he proposed an experiment to check if this was the case. So he proposed to use neutrinos from an accelerator, and these neutrinos should interact with neutrons, producing protons, and then either electrons, if it was the same species of electron neutrino, or muons in case this neutrino was different from the one detected by Rines and Cowan. Okay, so then he proposed the experiment, and these guys did the experiment, Lederman, Schwarz, and Steinberger, using a beam. They use a proton beam that was shoot to a target, then producing pions. The pions were decaying to neutrinos, this so-called accelerator neutrino. And then after the interaction of this accelerator neutrino, they detected muons. So they realized that it was not electrons detected. And indeed, it was a different neutrino than the one measured by Rines and Cowan. And for this discovery, they got the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1988. And the nice thing is that, the funny thing is that they got the Nobel Prize before the Nobel Prize was awarded to the discoverers of the electron neutrino. So there was a change of order. So 88 for nu mu and 95 for nu e. Okay, but then, so now we have two neutrinos. More than two neutrino flavors. Okay, so at the end of the 70s, at the SLAC, the tau particle was discovered. There was an imbalance of, it has been observed already, the tau particle, and there was an imbalance in the energy of the tau decay. That could suggest the presence of a third neutrino associated to the tau particle. Okay, but then 10 years later at the lab, there was some measurements trying to understand how many neutrinos there were coupling to the Z boson. And then these are the measurements of the invisible decay width of the Z boson. In that case, they measured this decay width of the Z to invisible particles. So in lab, it was possible to measure the coupling of Z to non-particles, okay, to detectable particles, and then doing taking the calculation of the total decay width of the Z and subtracting the decay width of the hadrons and the decay width to the charged leptons, then the part left was supposed to be the decay width to neutrinos. Okay, so then with this invisible decay width of the Z, then divided by the theoretical prediction of the width from Z to neutrino-neutrino, one could estimate the number of neutrinos that were coupling to the Z. Okay, you have here the invisible decay divided by the theoretical width of Z to any pair of neutrinos. And then it was a way to determine the number of light neutrinos coupled to Z. And then these results from the Alep, the Delphi, the different detectors at the lab show that this number of neutrinos should be around 3. Okay? So still, there was another neutrino there that has not been detected yet. And then it was a bit challenging, but in 2000, finally, the new tau was discovered by the Donut collaboration. Okay, the process is similar to the discovery of the new neutrino. So they had a beam of protons. In that case, the beam of protons was acting with a target, and then producing some mesons. And the mesons were produced new taus, and after the new taus produced a tau, and the tau was detected. So it was possible to see that this neutrino producing the process was different to the other neutrinos already known. There was no Nobel Prize for this neutrino so far. Okay, so now let's see. I've tried to do this historical introduction, also to introduce the Fermi theory and the parity in weak interactions. And now let's see which are the properties of neutrinos in the Standard Model. So in the Standard Model, so neutrinos are here. Neutrinos appear as doublets of SU2 together with charged leptons. Okay. In nature, only two types of neutrinos have been observed. Two types of neutrinos apart from the flavors. There have been observed neutrinos left-handed and antineutrinos right-handed. So in the Standard Model, there are no neutrinos right-handed or antineutrinos left-handed. This does not exist. This has not been observed. This does not participate in weak interactions. Then only left-handed neutrinos and right-handed antineutrinos exist. Okay. And then there are no SU2 neutrino singlets in the Standard Model, even though we have. Thank you. Thank you. So even though we have SU2 singlets for the charged leptons here, so there are no SU2 singlets for neutrinos in the Standard Model. Okay, what about interactions? Neutrino interacts with charged leptons, as we have seen. So these were the first processes through which neutrinos were detected, were the charged current interactions with charged leptons. Charged current weak interactions were first described by Fermi, as we have seen, with this point for fermion vertex. But then, after the theory was developed, then it was realized that this was an approximation, a low energy effective Lagrangian, and then the process was indeed mediated by a W boson. Okay, so this is, for instance, the diagram for the decay of the neutron, and this is in the Fermi theory, and this is already in the standard model with the Feynman diagram. So you can see the W boson doing the mediation, and the same for nu mu electron scattering. So also the process mediated by W, and you can see that W couples two leptons in the same doublet. So it couples nu mu with mu, nu e with e, and so on. So what about neutral currents? So the discoveries I told you about neutrinos were using charged currents, but in the standard model, the Glashow-Weng-Besaline model predicted also the existence of weak interaction mediated by a neutral vector boson, the Z0. This process was a bit harder to detect. It was first observed in 1973 with the Gargamel bubble chamber. So then it was observed through these processes, so the interaction of muon neutrino with nucleo, and also the scattering of muon neutrino with electrons. So this was the discovery of these neutral currents interactions of neutrinos. Okay. So in that case, the processes are mediated by the Z boson. So you can see the idea is the same as in the charged current, but here the mediator is this neutral gauge boson. And this was the first evidence for the existence of the Z boson. So what are the interactions of neutrinos in the standard model? So you can see this is the summary. So you may have charged current interactions where they are coupled, the charged lepton and neutrino with the same in the same doublet are coupled through this W plus or minus boson, and then through the neutral currents where neutrinos for the same flavor are coupled with the Z0 boson. Okay. And important thing, I'm repeating again, in the standard model, only left-handed neutrinos and right-handed antineutrinos participate in weak interactions, okay? So what else? You can see that these interactions conserve total lepton number, okay? So if we assign a lepton number to charged leptons and neutrinos equal to 1 and to their antiparticles equal to -1, then you see that these processes conserve total lepton number. But also these processes conserve also the family lepton numbers because there is no flavor change. Okay, so either the electron leptonic number, muon leptonic number, or tau leptonic number are conserved. So what about the neutrino production in the standard model? So weak interactions conserve flavor. We have seen that. Neutrinos are always produced together with their associated charged lepton. So in a source, we always produce nu e with e, nu mu with mu, or nu tau with tau. There is never a change in the flavor. So, and how do we detect neutrinos? So neutrinos are not always cannot be directly detected because they are neutral particles. So the idea, the technique to detect neutrinos is to do it indirectly through the detection of their associated charged lepton. For instance, if in a source we produce electron neutrino together with electron, then in the detector we know that an electron neutrino arrived because we measured an electron. And the same for other flavors. And then there is no mixing of flavors. This is in the standard model. If we produce an muon, we detect a muon at the end. Okay? This will change. But in the standard model, we are just considering that. And then another process that is very interesting, and I'm going to introduce it because I will discuss a little bit about this in the searches for physics beyond the standard model, is the coherent elastic neutrino nucleus scattering, also called SEVENS. This process is a standard model process that it was proposed, it was predicted in the 74 by Friedman, but it took really a lot of time to be detected. It was detected by the first time in 2017, okay? And now I will explain why. The thing is that usually when here, for instance, this is a process where the wavelength of the neutrino is much larger. The wavelength, sorry, of the Z0 is much larger of the size of the nucleon. So this 2r is the radius of the nucleon. Then this is because the energy transfer in the process is very small. Then it is that small that the wavelength of the Z0 is much larger than the size of the nucleus. Then, as a result, the Z0 sees the nucleus like a whole. So it cannot differentiate the different nucleus inside the nucleus. Then it interacts coherently with all the nucleons in the nucleus. Okay, and for instance, if we consider the inelastic, the elastic incoherent process where the wavelength of the Z0 is of the order of the size is smaller than the size of the nucleus, then you can see that the Z0 can resolve the different nucleons within the nuclei. So then it can interact with the different nucleons. Okay, but in that case, the sevens, this is the regime of the sevens, it interacts with all the nuclei as a whole. And then the powerful thing is that this produces an enhancement on the cross-section. So we have seen that the cross-section of neutrinos are very small, but given to this process, to this coherent interaction between the Z0 and all the nucleons in the nuclei, then the cross-section is enhanced. And then the cross-section gets a factor of n target square. And you can imagine n target is the number of neutrons in the material. So then you can get very large increasement of the cross-section. So this is why this process is so powerful, because the good thing is that the cross-section could be up to 2 times larger than inverse beta decay. And then the thing is that one can use kilogram size detectors in order to detect neutrinos. You have seen, we will see this afternoon in the exercises that one needs 1 ton size detector in order to measure solar neutrinos or to measure astrophysical neutrinos. In that case, given this enhancement of the cross-section, even detectors of the kilogram size can measure a few neutrinos per day. And this is the powerful thing of this kind of process. Okay, so here you have the value of the cross-section. We will discuss in detail when we will discuss about the BSM physics. Okay. Yeah, this is the cover in Science when finally this process was first detected. The thing is that it took so long to be detected because in order to measure the process, one needs to detect the recoil of the nucleus. So there is a beam of neutrinos that are interacting with a nucleus, and then the nucleus, due to the transfer of momentum that is very small, gets some energy of recoil. Then the recoil is so small that one needs cryogenic detectors in order to measure such small energies. And then it was not until 2017 that it was detected for the first time. Now there are some detectors at the Coherent, there's several detectors worldwide, not only in the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, but there are many, many detectors exploiting this kind of process. Okay, I will explain this in the next session. Okay, what about neutrino masses? We have discussed the interactions of neutrinos in the standard model. What about neutrino masses? So in the standard model, the way to introduce masses in the Lagrangian is usually with terms like this one. That is the Dirac mass term. Okay, you remember we have already discussed about the chiral states, left-handed and right-handed states. So if we decompose the fields of the particles in these chiral states, one can write this Dirac mass term in such a way. And you can see that what I was saying before. If you remember when we wrote the current, we saw that in the current, in vector axial current, the left and right-handed components were not mixed. We have one term only with left-handed currents, with left-handed fields, another with right-handed fields. So here you see that the Dirac mass term mixes, and then you get components mixing left and right components. Okay, and this term is not invariant. In principle, you cannot build this term in the Lagrangian because this term is not invariant under the symmetries of the standard model, because the new left are in doublets. You remember they transform as a doublets for SU2, while the psi are singlets. They transform as a singlet. So then these terms don't respect gauge invariance. You cannot couple Cl with Cr. But you can solve this with the Higgs mechanism, because with the Higgs mechanism, you can just, this term will be essentially the result of this term here in the Lagrangian. You will have the coupling of the left field, the right field, and the Higgs field, okay? And only after the spontaneous symmetry breaking, once the Higgs get above, then you get the term above. But essentially from the Lagrangian, this term is allowed. This respects gauge invariance, okay? Then in principle, this is the term, and you can manage to build it with the Higgs mechanism, and then with the Higgs mechanism, you can get this mass term for particles. This is okay for most of the particles of the Standard Model, but not for the neutrino, because for the neutrino, there is no right-handed field. We have seen it in the content of the Standard Model, there is no right-handed field. So then we cannot build, even with the trick of the Higgs, we cannot build this term. So in principle, this term is not allowed for neutrinos in the Standard Model. With electrons, yes, with other particles, it's possible. Okay. So then what can we do? There is no right-handed field, but we can build a right-handed field from the left-handed field we have in the Standard Model. This is what Majorana proposed. This is what a Majorana neutrino. Then one can build this right-handed chiral field by charge conjugation of the left-handed field, okay? This is only allowed for neutral particles. You cannot do this for charged particles, okay? And then with this new definition, you don't need to introduce a new field. So you have that the two components of your field will be essentially the left-handed in the Standard Model plus the right-handed that you build by charge conjugation from your left-handed field. Okay. So in that case, with this new term with the two helicities, you can write the Majorana mass term in that way. But again, this term is not allowed by the symmetries of the Standard Model because it's not invariant under weak isospin. So you cannot build it also. You can solve this problem instead with a Higgs doublet. You can do it with a Higgs triplet, okay? But there is no Higgs triplet in the Standard Model. So this is not helping. And you can solve it with a dimension 5 operator that is called the Weinberg operator, but the Weinberg operator is not renormalizable. So it is not possible to have this kind of operator in the Standard Model, okay? So even though you can manage to build a right-handed field from your left-handed field, it is impossible to build this Majorana mass term. It's essentially with the content and the properties of the fields in the Standard Model, okay? So, in summary, then, neutrino mass in the Standard Model, there are no right-handed neutrinos, so the Dirac mass term cannot be built as for the rest of fermions. There is only one Higgs doublet, no Higgs triplet, so you cannot build the Majorana mass term, okay? And since the Standard Model is renormalizable, you cannot use the Weinberg operator to build Majorana mass terms for the neutrino. So this is why neutrinos are strictly massless in the Standard Model. Okay, but we know that this is not the case because for the discovery of neutrino oscillations, this is the sentence that explained why Kajita and McDonald were awarded by the Nobel Prize of Physics in 2015, and it was for the discovery of neutrino oscillations, which shows that neutrinos have a mass. Okay, it's true that the masses of neutrinos is orders of magnitude smaller than the other particles. You have here this diagram. But at least two of the three neutrinos are massive. So then one needs to rethink about the Standard Model in order to introduce neutrino masses. So what we can do? So one possibility is to do a minimal extension of the Standard Model. One can add by hand right-handed neutrinos. So you can just say, okay, the Standard Model does not have this particle, but I added a new particle. And then you will have, this is what you usually we call a sterile neutrino. Sterile because it does not interact with interactions of the Standard Model. It's singlet under SU2, U1, okay? So in that case, we will have these four components for the Dirac neutrino, and then one can build, there is no problem to build now the Dirac mass term that we have seen. It was impossible because now we have a new right-handed term that we have just added by hand. So then this term is possible. And then if we consider again the Higgs mechanism, so that couples this left-handed component with the right-handed, then there's no problem to having this mass. The only problem here is regarding the order of magnitude, because we have seen that neutrino masses are much below the masses of the other particles. If we consider that the mechanism giving mass to neutrinos is the same mechanism that is giving mass to electrons or other particles of the Standard Model, then one can see that the couplings we need are much smaller, for instance. So you get this value for the Lagrangian, then after the spontaneous symmetry breaking, this is the value of the Dirac mass. And then since we know that neutrino masses should be of below 0.05 electron volt of this order, we need Yukawa couplings. That is the strength of the coupling between the neutrinos and the Higgs of the order 10 to the minus 13, while for instance in the case of electrons is of the order of 10 to the minus 5. So then one might say that there is a problem of fine-tuning here. So in order to apply the same mechanism to give neutrino masses as the one used to explain other masses of the other particles, one needs to use very, very smaller Yukawa couplings. Okay. So another possibility is the so-called minimal seesaw mechanism. So here we also need to include this new right-handed states, NR. And in that case, one can build, in addition to the Dirac mass term, we can build a Majorana mass term. Okay? So a Majorana mass term for the right-handed state, for this NR. So then this will be the Lagrangian with the mass matrix for the explaining the mass of the heavy and light states. And then you will have, in that case, one will have Dirac and Majorana mass terms simultaneously. Okay, in order to get the values of the masses, one needs to diagonalize the Lagrangian to get the diagonal, the eigenvalues of the masses. And then one can see that with this minimal seesaw mechanism, if one considers the mass of the Majorana mass of the heavy of the right-handed states much larger than the Dirac mass, one can obtain rather light masses for the active neutrinos. So with this approach, one may have M1, that will be the mass for the Standard Model neutrinos, M1 of order md squared over Mr, and M2 Mr. So selecting Mr quite large, naturally, let's say, one may get very light M1. This is why this is so-called seesaw, because if we add new states very heavy, by the seesaw mechanism, we just get very light masses for the Standard Model neutrinos. Okay. So this is, I mean, the difference between this mechanism and the mechanism of the Dirac mass is that here there is no this fine-tuning that we should add in the other case for the couplings. So here, just assuming this mass very large, one can get naturally M1 light. So, but this has consequences as well, because if we consider that Dirac mass of the order of the electroweak scale, 100 GeV, and then we need to build neutrino masses of the order of 0.001 1 electron volt, one needs to introduce very heavy particles. So the mass of these particles should be the order of 10 to 13, 10 to the 15 GeV. Okay? So then you don't have the problem on one side, but you have it on the other side. You should introduce very, very massive particles. And then this makes a problem, because in that case, it's very difficult to detect these particles in experiments. The good thing is that with this scheme, one can explain the baryon asymmetry of the universe through the leptogenesis. So considering that the decay of the heavy neutrino violates CP symmetry, then one can explain why in the origin of the universe there was this asymmetrical behavior between matter and antimatter. Okay. Another possibility is the Weinberg operator. In the case of if neutrinos are Majorana, these masses can be generated via the Weinberg operator. That is essentially an effective dimension 5 operator for Majorana neutrinos. So this is here would be the diagram for the operator. You can see if it is dimension 5, the thing is that one needs the coupling should be dimension full. Okay, and this is why this is non-renormalizable. So this would be the coupling of the leptons to the Higgs, and after the spontaneous symmetry breaking, this would be would result in the Majorana mass. where this M should be a new physics scale that one needs to introduce also by hand. And in that case, this process violates the Neptune number in 2 units, so then it opens the possibility for some processes like neutrinoless double beta decay. Okay, concerning the CISO models, they are maybe you have heard before we have discussed about the minimal CISO model, but there is a generalization of the CISO models. Essentially, they are a realization of the Weinberg operator, the one we have seen here. So then, depending on the content of particles that we use, we may have different types of CISO. And in both cases, neutrino masses are generated through the mixing with heavy particles. For instance, in type 1 CISO, we introduce, so you see that it is essentially we include matter in this part here, that it is what is the point in this Weinberg operator. So we get the matter content there. In the type 1 CISO, the particles introduced are right-handed singlets, okay? In the type 2 CISO, the mediator particle is an scalar triplet. In the case of type 3 CISO, the mediator particle is a fermion triplet, okay? Again, they are particles that they are not introduced, they are not present in the standard model. We need to add them in order to explain this mass. And in all cases, the mass of neutrinos, the light mass of neutrinos appears naturally, let's say, due to the introduction of very heavy other particles, like the ones here. So here you have the value of the neutrino mass in all 3 cases. Okay, these schemes, these CISO mass models are very, very popular. The bad point, the difficult point that they have is what I told you before. You need to introduce very heavy particles in order to explain the light mass of the neutrinos. And these very, very massive particles are very difficult to detect because you don't have the energy at the accelerators in order to produce them. Then they are popular, but they are difficult to falsify, okay, and to check the predictions. So then there's this other kind of models, the low energy CISO models, that even though they can be a bit more complicated because you need to introduce additional content. For instance, this is the inverse CISO model where you need to add 6 different particles, 6 different SU2 singlets. It's much more complicated. Now the mass matrix is a 3 by 3 that essentially is 9 by 9 because each block contains the flavor. But the good thing of this kind of processes is that you may build light neutrino masses without so heavy particles. So for instance, in that case, you can get neutrino mass very light, even if this M you introduce is far below the GAT scale. So with if the parameters in the model is, for instance, this mu is order TeV, with a mass of the new particle of the order of the TeV, you can obtain masses of neutrinos of the order of electron volts. So this means that in that model, you need particles with mass of the TeV, and then you can prove it at the LHC. At the LHC, you can try to look for these particles, and then you can try to falsify these models. So they are a bit more complicated from the point of view of the content, but you may have some interesting predictions, interesting phenomenology at the colliders that might help you to check these predictions. Other possibilities are the radiative, I'm finishing. Other possibilities are the radiative models. In the case of radiative models, so here the key point is that we need to build models in order to explain the smallness of neutrino masses. In the CISO, okay, with the Dirac, we have just to tune very small Yukawa couplings. With the CISO, we need to introduce very heavy mediator particles that will turn in very light neutrino masses. Here in these radiative models, the idea is that the masses are acquired via loops. So you have these processes, for instance, in the C model, there is you need to add a singlet scalar and an extra Higgs doublet, and then according to the couplings of the different particles, the mass of the neutrino appears due to this loop. Then you know that the loops are suppressed. Then here, the small value of the mass will come via the suppression of the loop. Okay, so then there are different models, for instance, the C model, the C-Babu model, and here essentially they are based on the extension of the scalar sector of the standard model, and neutrino masses are generated through these loops. Okay, and but apart from the smallness of the neutrino masses, there are other problems concerning the mixing that we will discuss tomorrow, and also the mass of neutrinos. So for instance, from one side, there's models of neutrino mass, because the CISO models could explain, but these models cannot explain other things. For instance, they cannot explain why the quark and lepton mixing are so different. We have not discussed about mixing yet, but I guess you have heard the lepton mixing, right? And then you know that the quark, the mixing of quarks, there is one angle that is 13 and not very large, and the other angles are small. In the case of neutrinos, we will see tomorrow, the angles, at least two of them are very large. So the CISO models cannot explain why is that. Also, they cannot explain why there are these hierarchical relations between the masses of the particles. Okay, so it is not only the smallness of neutrino masses, there are different topics to be addressed. And in order to address some of these problems, that it is called as the flavor problem or the flavor puzzle, then one can add new symmetries to the leptons of the standard model. I will not enter into details, but this kind of puzzling situations can be explained, can be tried to address, just adding to the symmetry group of the standard model extra symmetries that could try to explain this different behavior. Okay, and I think I will stop here, and then we can continue tomorrow with this neutrino selector.